Hi guys, this is the History of Everything, and today we are going to be talking about the Vietnam War. So, the Vietnam War, it was controlled by France before the war, and then after World War II, the communists under Ho Chi Minh rebelled, and France said, no, we want to keep our colonies, and they sent a lot of troops. Harry S. Truman sent a few $1 billion, but it was a mistake because the Ho Chi Minh troops kept winning, and they defeated the French. And then when America got involved in 1969 in the Gulf of Tonkin Tonkin incident, it was when it was when um, North Vietnamese torpedo boats fired on a battleship, and a fight broke out. And in 1965, the president issued an order that start sending troops to Vietnam, and they would land in the cavalry. Now there weren't any horses, but at the time they called the cavalry the helicopters. So, one of the most famous helicopters was the Huey and the Chinook, and the Chinook had two blades, and the Huey had one, and it actually was able to. They were like, and they had two machine guns that could spray the area, and the Americans also used Agent Orange. It was they would spray, and it would ruin the jungle, and some soldiers got it and were killed. It's very, very sad what happened in in war. It's very sad. Um, so in the Vietnam War, um, so like when they were like they would do different bombings, the naval and the air force, the navy and the air force, and at first it was called, and before they started sending troops, it was called Operation Rolling Thunder. Now, Operation Rolling Thunder only lasted a year, and a lot of the planes were shut down because Chinese troops again were there and Russians advisors were there. Now, the American generals wanted to fight it like Korea, but they failed because the North Vietnamese soldiers did guerrilla warfare, and it was just even harder, and the Americans didn't know the jungle very well. So, whenever they would keep trying and pressing in, they would keep falling behind, and a lot of them would get killed. It's very, very it's so sad how a lot of men died, and so they lasted until the 70s. So it was Lyndon B. Johnson, then Richard M. Nixon for our presidents, and a lot of the North Vietnamese, they blended in like civilians, and they could do ambushes um, or like bombing attacks, or sometimes they even took their own lives with the bombing attacks. So a lot of these, they just wanted their freedom. Now, before, during World War II, the Americans had trained them, and because they were against the Japanese and trying to help them fight against the Japanese. And this was a fatal mistake because later we were in Vietnam. And yeah, a lot of the planes they used were the F-100s, and they would go and they would just on Operation Rolling Thunder. They actually, so the naval and the air force planes got like sometimes they ran into each other, so they would have to like this section is for the navy, this section is for the air force, and while they kept doing Operation Rolling Thunder, a lot of the troops there after Operation Rolling Thunder kept fighting. So this was very, very bad. Like, so they would have that bases, and then Chinook and Hueys would come down land, and the troops would go on different patrols. Now, some North Vietnamese troops would hide in haystacks, and if it was a bigger patrol, they wouldn't ambush it. If it was a smaller, they would ambush it. So it has to do with the size of whether they ambush it or not. Now, a lot of the Americans, there weren't that many tanks. The North Vietnamese used these small tunnels, and the Americans had to go throw like a gas grenade in, and then have a gas mask on and go get them out of there. Like on like go because the small little holes you had to duck your head in, and the Americans called the troops that were in there the Americans that found the tunnels between the connected the North Vietnamese. They called them tunnel rats because they were supposed to go and and there would always be a guard with a rifle crouched down. You're supposed to go through a grenade to make the guard run away, and then they would go look for different files or different important things that they had at the base containing. Now, the Russians were there, but there were no Russian troops, and they helped like advisors. It was basically like South Vietnam, where the Americans sent advisors, but the Russians sent advisors and MiGs as well. In my last video about Korea, I talked about the MiG-21, and that was actually a lot of MiGs were used here, or MiGs, they were used here, and the American F-100s were also used here, as I talked before earlier. There are a lot of bombers, and they're still used today, but they're just really old. It almost looks like a normal air jet, and then they would keep on bombing. Now, a lot of them got shot down because of the missiles and the airstrikes that the Chinese and the Vietnamese did. Now, in 1973, Richard M. Nixon reassigned and pulled out all the troops in Vietnam. And the very end, the North Vietnamese actually used tanks to go, so they were motorized at the very end to go and capture the South Vietnamese capital. So now Vietnam is still communist. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video about the Vietnam War. Please subscribe, like this video, share with your friends, and thank you for watching.